Okay, really.
Absolutely. Um, so take me back to that day, if you will. Um,
Sure.
did you know she was working that morning? I mean, what did you know her schedule, or did
hmm
you tell me how
So,
everything kind of
yeah.
unfolded?
So I believe at the time she would um, get up overnight. I don't exactly know the times. In my mind, it was sometime after midnight. It's something she could do between like midnight and 3 o'clock, which for her, that was a time she was normally awake. That wasn't really difficult for her at all. It really kind of was an advantage. And that really, honestly, one of these hindsight things when I think about, what she was doing in this job, you know, looking at it after the fact, um, we didn't realize the neighborhoods that she was in. Honestly, all we heard from her was how much she really enjoyed doing this. She would talk to us about the people she would meet at the Waffle House that she would stop at while she was on her route, because it was the same time of day, same time of night, same group of people. She really liked connecting with those people. She just kind of talked about how it was really, she didn't come across a whole lot of people other than that. She's kind of, pulled out her 10 pound bundles of papers, emptied the change, and she really just talked about how much she enjoyed it. After the fact and after looking at everything that happened, me personally, I mean, I look at that now and I'm like, no, I would not want a pregnant woman to do that, and that was something that kind of hurt me when everything happened. Is people would, they say you should never read the comments, and you really shouldn't. But of course I would, because you can't avoid it. And people would comment, it's like, why is a pregnant woman doing that? And I mean, in hindsight, I felt that, but at the time, it was, she loved it. All she would talk about is how much she enjoyed doing it. And so from our perspective, it was this good thing, and she was safe, and she was able to help her family.
Yeah, and I mean, she's a grown woman making her own choices. She's confident,
hmm
smart, doing her own thing. It wouldn't have been right for
hmm
somebody to tell her not to do that, you know?
Right.
Um, so where were you on that day, on June 14th, 2007, and how did you get the news? Kevin's kind of told me his part where he went to
Sure.
Tim's because Tim had called him. So
Um,
how did you learn about everything?
so so when everything went down, it was this very kind of a unique time for our family, because we were all living under the same roof for the first time in a couple years. Obviously, Jenna and Tim, they had their home in Fuquay. They were living together, but my parents and my three siblings, we were all living in the same house again.
You were
Charlie
in
had been
Clayton,
living.
was that
We
right? Were
were
you in
in
Clayton?
We were in Holly
You,
Springs.
you were in Holly Springs.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Which back then it all looks the same. It's
Sure,
all a big
sure,
suburb
sure.
now. Um, but we were living in Holly Springs. My sister had just moved from Utah to North Carolina. So we had, and then that had happened just a few days before all this happened.
I was going to say, how long, well, so Tim came first and then she came to join him. Is that what happened?
Yeah. So essentially, around March, April, Kevin and Tim moved out to Lillington to work for Boone Edom, and then we all moved out in August, because the way they were on Medicaid or some program like that, but the only way they would pay for Caden's birth were if he were born in Utah. So it was this
Mm.
weird circumstance where, like, and Caden was born in July, so we had to basically had to wait for him to be born, and then when he was 10 days old, we drove him out to North Carolina. Um,
So
that's the timeline
that
on
would
that.
have been like what, maybe you said a few days. So like it would have been June. It was June or
Oh, that was August of the year before. So we
okay.
moved in that August, and then year passes, and now we're in June.
I got you. So
Um,
they had been
yeah,
there. They had
they'd
been
been
there
there almost a year.
almost a year. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
they'd been there
and,
almost a year.
and so when Tim calls Kevin that day to say, I can't find Jenna, I'm worried about Jenna, were you, I mean, you were probably sleeping. It was,
Yeah.
you know,
So it was first thing in the morning. I was just getting up. I was getting ready to go to my job at the Independent, getting dressed for that day, and then Kevin comes into my room and says, "Hey, we're gonna go out. They can't find Jenna." So the very first word is we haven't heard anything. We just know she hasn't come home. Um, so I kind of switched modes. I went from, getting ready to work to, okay, I'm going to go, get ready to go, I guess, find my sister. And with it being the circumstances, it was definitely, I mean, worrying. She normally returns every night. That's her not coming home is not a thing that happens. Um, and so with her being 8, I think she was 8 months and 1 week. I'm not sure, around there. She was over 8 months pregnant, and so first thing that goes for us is, the first thing that we think of is she's gone into labor, or she's been in a car accident, or something to that effect. Kind of innocent things that can happen to people, and so we started calling local hospitals to see if she had
Things that
turned
make
up there.
sense because I mean,
Right,
like you said, she was pregnant and she drove a car for her job. So those would have been things that you
right.
would think of.
Those are the first two things, first things that we thought of. Um, honestly, yeah. So those are the things that we thought of. Um, so I went about, changing what I was doing, getting ready to head out, and then Tim called Kevin again and said, "I need you to come over to the house. You don't need to look for Jenna. Let's, that was the word. It really wasn't even the full story. So from our perspective, we're like, okay, it was kind of
So
like this weird pause of like, okay,
what's going
Kevin's going
on?
over to their house. We don't need to look for Jenna. So it's kind of this weird, I guess we're just going to go about our day. So I go back to getting ready for work. My mom, she worked in North Raleigh. So Stacy went to go to work. Um, and then I'm getting ready to go, and I get a call on my cell phone. And then I pick it up, and my mom tells me Jenna died last night. Um, and that, in that very moment, it's really sticks in my brain because I'd heard people, say things about about their blood running cold. But in that very moment when I felt those words, like I felt a coldness that went really down to my soul. Like I don't know how else to explain it. Um, and I paused. I mean, I don't know what else you do in that situation. And she, had to yell at me to get my attention and told me to wake up my siblings. And so I hung up the phone, and at that point, everything really just becomes, you're just, basic operating mode, I guess, at that point. So then I went to the other side of the house, woke up Charlie, pulled him into Chris's room, and then I told Charlie and Chris that Jenna had died. And then we all kind of broke down at that point, and then Mom came in, and we got ourselves together and went over to Tim and Jenna's house.
Did you know that she had been killed at that point, or did you know any details?
At that point, I didn't know any details. Um, I didn't know. I didn't know that she was murdered. I think in my mind, just the words that my mom had used, that she had been killed, like that made it sound like something had been done to her. So I think that was in my mind, but at that point, I didn't know any details whatsoever.
So the next step, you go to Tim's house,
Yeah. So
or Tim and Jenna's.
yeah, we quickly get in the car and drive over to Tim and Jenna's house, which is down toward downtown Fuquay. I have no idea what Fuquay's like now. But we get there, and we can see the black police car outside. We see two men in suits standing outside the door. Um, we go in the house. I mean, and that's an ominous thing when you see the police standing outside when you're finding out your sister's been killed. I mean, I've been in situations where I've lost family members, and the police are very rarely involved, even when it's a traffic accident. They come and they let you know, and then they leave. They're not a presence.
Hanging out.
Yeah, they're not hanging out outside and giving you your time. So we went inside, and Kevin and Tim were just falling apart, crying everywhere. Skylar and Caden were just kind of confused by the whole situation. They were kind of excited that everybody was coming over. They didn't understand what was going on, which, I mean, being 3 and 1, understandable. Um, so that was kind of how that went. And then from there, they told us that the police wanted to talk to Kevin and Tim, and that we just needed to go home. Um, and so they went to the detective to Raleigh to talk to the police detectives, and we all went home. And I I don't know what you do in that situation. I started searching the internet. I started looking at the local news sources just to see if this had been picked up at all. Partially because I didn't know, I had no idea what had happened. All I knew was that somebody had killed her. I didn't know the circumstances. I didn't know where she was. I didn't know the method. I didn't know any of that. So really, I was looking at the news just to find out what happened. Um,
And that had to be really hard because I mean, you're reading these details. It's like surreal in a way. You're reading these details
yeah,
about someone you love, and
yeah,
it's just right there in black and white.
yeah. It's right there in black and white, and it's written in the most impersonal way. I mean, just as those things are written, as they're supposed to be written in journalism. It just is what it is. And I don't remember who. I think it was the News and Observer that had gotten the first little nugget, and that's really all it was. And it just had the basic details that she had passed. Um, but I think they had some fact wrong, and I think at this point, all I knew is that she'd been murdered, and that the person hadn't been apprehended. They had not found the person that had done it. So in my mind, I'm thinking like everybody needs to know this because we all need to be on the lookout for this guy. So I, in my grief and confusion, called the tip lines of WRAL and the News and Observer and just said, "Hey, y'all are getting this story wrong. Um, please call me so we can get the right story out there so we can catch this person."
And how,
Um,
Jason, how old were you?
I was 22 years old at that
Because you're
time,
the same
or
age as
I
Jenna.
was I was 20 I was 21. Excuse me, I was
Okay.
21 at that time.
I mean, like you said, like there's no playbook for this, right? There's
No.
nobody knows how to be the loved one of a murder victim. And so all of a sudden you're just kind of like thrust into this. Um,
Yeah,
and
you're
and
you're
and
really
you
thrust in. Yeah, yeah, being thrust into it, thinking. I mean, an hour ago, I thought I was going to be going to work, sitting at a desk job, pushing papers, and now I'm sitting here trying to figure out who killed my sister. That sounds like a movie, but that was my real life, um, truthfully.
and what was going, how were you kind of numb or did you have feelings? Were they, I
Oh,
mean, I'm sure there were so many
yeah,
stages of the grief, including anger.
yeah. I think initially, for definitely that first day or two, it was shock, being in pure shock. I really did feel like I was in a movie or some kind of series. Um, very numb. Um, I think for me, the way I handled it was I was trying to get it out to as many news sources as possible. I wanted as many people to know as possible, um, which puts you in a vulnerable situation because you're having to tell this traumatic story countless times over and over and over again. And then I got in this really strange just from an average person perspective of it did kind of get to this point where it was starting to get national attention. And my phone was blowing up. I was hearing from reporters from CNN, every local outlet, because nobody else in my family was at a point where they wanted to talk. So I guess that was the role I took on.
Yeah, you became
Um,
the spokesperson for your family,
yeah,
basically.
really kind
Yeah.
of initially. And I guess that was just because that was what I was capable of doing at the time. And it got to this point where, like, I remember I got a call from, it was somebody at CNN Headline News. It was some, like, John Scott or some, like, run of the mill name. But he had reached out to me, and we'd missed their connection, and I called him back. And when he talked to me about it, he talked to me about it like it was a story. He sat there and he said, I would love to get this on CNN, but as of right now, there's nothing new coming out. There's no new developments that have come out. This really isn't a story. Um, which, from his professional perspective, I absolutely 110% understand where he's coming from. But in that very moment, I would have given absolutely anything to have been able to reach through the phone and just punch him right in the face. Because that was my sister that he was talking about. And I hadn't called him, he had called me. That was the others. It wasn't like I was trying to push something. I think that the media, and in our dealings with the media, we found that the local media was the most human. I don't know any other way to put it, other than I felt like the local outlets, the people. I mean, they felt like people. They felt like they were seeing us as a true family that was going through a tragedy. Um, Whereas the national people, they want the story, which that's their job. Um, but it was definitely a little less personal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the local media, they have an investment in the community,
Hmm.
because it's where we live. It's you're part of our community, and it doesn't behoove us to not be human, with people that live in our community. I mean, it's important.
Hmm.
There were so many, and Kevin and I talked about this. There were so many, I guess, hopeful moments, but also red herrings. You've got this composite. It's pretty specific.
Hmm.
And according to Kevin, there were several people who just happened to be in that area who saw this guy running away. Did you think when you saw that really specific composite, oh, they're going to solve this really quickly because look at that picture? I mean, somebody knows this guy.
Yeah, I mean, it was something I was definitely hopeful for. They had that composite really quickly, um, and they actually said they had what the way they had described it is they had um, somebody that was a just a citizen of Raleigh that was in the area that that saw this person running away from the scene, like saw them coming from the back of the gas station, and they locked eyes, and he took his shirt and put it over his head and ran away. And I remember initially, because when the public saw the composite sketch, I'd say at least half the people said that looks like a woman, um, which, I mean, looking at it, it was definitely feminine features. But the police told us that when the witness saw this person pull their shirt over their head and run away, his pants fell down around his ankles and removed any doubt that this was a man. So that was very hopeful at first. As our family, we went to the state farmers market and passed out flyers all day. Um, the Raleigh community was very, very kind to us. There were a lot of people that pulled us aside and told us about how they'd heard the story, and just wanted to talk to us about how much it affected them personally and how much they felt for us. Um, so that was a very kind of an eye-opening experience, as people that hadn't been living in the area for a year yet, to be just kind of to be embraced really by the Raleigh community, and to have them tell us how much they cared, really meant a lot.
Was
Um,
this phone call made by a Spanish speaking person to the police. There was also a guy who said he had found a knife
mhm.
not far from there. And so there were these kind of moments that really made it seem like, well, gosh, there's a lot here. They're going to be able to pull
Yeah,
this together pretty quickly, but that didn't happen.
yeah, there was a lot of movement, and kind of the situation we were in. Raleigh PD was pretty open with us and talking to us about things, because they knew that we weren't running and telling everything that they told us directly to the media. So we were kind of finding things out while everybody was finding out, oh, somebody found a knife. We had heard from Raleigh PD that they had already processed it and found out it wasn't involved. So it was kind of like everybody's getting excited, but we're kind of saying, well, it's not quite the lead that we thought it was. We got the composite sketch, and that was encouraging, but then when we talked to Zeke Morse, he would talk about when he would go into the neighborhoods and interview people, that they would not emphasize the drawing, partially because they felt like he'd probably cut his hair and change his appearance, but also they just didn't want it to cloud, people's judgment. I was encouraged by what Raleigh PD said that they were doing initially. Jim Segru, the spokesperson for Raleigh PD, told my family that somebody was going to be caught by Christmas. So that was our perspective. That was what we were looking at. And so, 17 Christmases later, we're still waiting for that call.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you had, like you said, you had some traction with the media. You had a lot of local coverage. I know I
Hmm.
did a lot of it. And then you had some national coverage, including America's Most Wanted, which was,
Hmm.
really high profile at the time. USA Today also did a big spread. Um,
Hmm.
and that America's Most Wanted led to somebody that looked like they could be a suspect, right, in another state. It was
Hmm.
a sex offender, and they thought, "Oh gosh, this makes sense." And the guy had been in Raleigh, and there were some similarities with the composite. But again, that turned out to be a dead end, and I guess for all of you, it was like a roller coaster, right?
And I think the big thing that they were interested in him is that he roughly fit the physical description and that he was in Raleigh at the time and he was somebody that had committed violent crimes in the past. So there was some hopeful there. I felt in the composite sketch they talked about a guy that was like 5'5", 5'4", relatively short, and this guy was 6 feet tall. So in my mind, I was kind of thinking, I'm like, yeah, I mean, he was in the area, but he's a white guy. They're looking for a Hispanic individual. It's just for me, it didn't seem like there was enough things that matched up. I mean, I was obviously had my fingers crossed that this was the person, but um,
It
I think
didn't make
Raleigh PD,
sense.
it
Yeah.
didn't really all add up quite. And I didn't get the impression from Raleigh PD. They're like, yeah, we're pursuing this because we should, but I didn't get the impression from them that they were convinced that this was the guy. Um, and then this is the early thing where, and this is where CSI gets into our brains and ruins our expectations of how these things work. This was 3, 4 months, I can't remember exactly, definitely within the first 6 months of all this happening. And you would think, oh, well, they got DNA evidence and they got all of this DNA everywhere. But the very fact of the matter is, the Raleigh PD has to choose three, a 3 square inch piece of fabric and say, we need you to test that for DNA. And then they hear back 6 months later. So at that point, we did not have any DNA. We didn't have anything. We were just kind of going off of time and circumstance, and that was the person that popped up.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean, I think there was a hair found on the
mhm,
back of one of her hands, and there was also some DNA on her shirt.
mhm,
And what's interesting is today they can take really small amounts of DNA, degraded DNA, and test them. And so,
yeah.
you would think that by this time that they would have been able to make a match. So time goes on, you
Mhm,
get a story in the media like every, on the anniversary maybe, I know
mhm,
maybe the 10-year anniversary, but it goes cold. And even with all
mhm.
the tips and all the leads, it goes cold. Did you ever expect that it would still be unsolved so many years later?
Um, Honestly, when it first happened and for the first year, I thought, something, an arrest was imminent. I mean, that's what Raleigh PD was telling me. Well, that's what the Raleigh PD spokesperson was telling us. Zeke Morse, he was much more measured in managing our expectations and kind of let us know that this was going to be a long haul. In these sort of murder cases, you know, 9 times out of 10 in a murder case, it's somebody that's close to the victim. And so when it's not somebody that's close to the victim, that, you've got a whole group of people that could have been. Um, so it was definitely the long haul. So we went several years just kind of, just a whole lot of nothing. And I think for the last, I'm not exactly sure on the timeline, but I'd say the last 5 years, they eventually, because of advancements in DNA technology, they were able to resubmit the samples that they had, and they were able to get a full, or I don't know if it's a full profile, but it was enough to enough to eliminate possibilities to where, like, if we had the right DNA, it's either going to be this person or it's going to be like their brother or their dad. And amongst those people, we can separate who was there at the time. And so it was enough that they could use that to arrest somebody and make them a suspect. But after a while, and I think because Raleigh PD felt like we weren't going to just run and go tell the media, honestly, I was exhausted by the whole process and wasn't really interested in. I mean, none of us were ever wanted to be on TV. None of us loved that. It was just all about getting the word out. But they opened up to us that they did have a suspect. No, they never said that they had a suspect. Let me correct. I want to make sure they
No,
never
no,
had.
no.
They did never call him a suspect, and they have never called him a suspect officially. But he is somebody that matches up with all of their evidence. He was in the area. He is somebody who has committed violent crimes in the past. He is somebody who has killed people in the past, and he's in Mexico. He is in this rural place in Mexico, and essentially what we heard from Raleigh PD was that we put in a request with the U.S. Marshals, but they are busy people, and unless they decide to make it a priority, we're kind of have to sit and wait and see if maybe he comes back to the country or not. But we may never know because he lives in a super rural area and we can't keep eyes on him. So that
And
that
then
was
he
kind of the
also,
holding pattern.
right, you also have to see if he can be extradited,
Oh
he's
yeah,
if he would fight that, how that would
right.
work. Um,
Yeah.
I
And I
mean,
think
that's
that was part of the reason why they wouldn't name him as a suspect. Because if then they name him a suspect, then there's more negotiations that happen over extradition. And I think that they wanted the death penalty to be in play, which, Mexico has the long understood policy. They don't like their citizens to be executed in foreign countries.
how long
Um,
ago did you first hear this? Because Kevin's told me this as well.
I'm not 100% sure. I want to say it's within the last 5 years. Um, I might have written like a journal entry about it at some point. I could maybe find a date, but I
That's
want to say
okay. I mean, it's got to be
yeah.
so frustrating though to hear that,
Oh,
right?
it's so completely frustrating to know that again, they never called him a suspect, but he has been their one person of interest for a decade. So they may not be calling him a suspect, but I'm calling him a suspect. Um, and to know that he's right there, you know,
Living
you
his
could you
life.
living his life, hopefully looking over his shoulder, um, and to just know that there's nothing that we can do. There's nothing that we can do. The media, um, the media is the media. The media is keeping up with what's happening now, and in 17 years, there's so many other things that have happened, and I understand that, but like the media didn't care anymore, truthfully,
Kind of just
and
like went cold and dropped off
went
everybody's
cold and
radar.
dropped off, and so it's very much like, okay, we're sitting, waiting, hoping, and ultimately, and all through all of this, me as a person, I was 21 when this happened. I'm 38 now. I had to grow up and become a person and try to figure out how to be a fully present spouse, like emotionally and physically. And
And a
so,
father.
and a father and all of these things. And when you have this really traumatic thing happen, I think I haven't talked specifically with my family about all of these things, but I've had to go through this myself where if you have this really traumatic thing that happens and you're waiting for resolution to process, but then there's no resolution, you're just constantly waiting for that resolution. You never really go through that cycle of grief and of going through that full loop of trauma so that you can actually move on and not be traumatized. um
Yeah, I mean, how has this impacted your life in terms of, like you said, just becoming
yeah
all these things that you've become?
I For me, I don't think I felt anything for maybe 10 years. Maybe not quite that long, but I went a long time, definitely 5 or 6 years where truthfully I didn't feel anything. When you hit that level of trauma, you cope. You're even if you're not dealing with it, your body figures out how to continue to function. And when you feel that really that severe low, that depth of grief, um, you become numb to it. But when you become to that terrible feeling, you also become numb to the really good feelings too. And so for me, I kind of got to this point when I was 26, 27, when I was like, I have these good things happening in my life, but I'm not happy. So I had to go through a whole journey of really truthfully therapy, um, that I continue through this day, doing, trauma-based therapies and things like that, just to get to a point where I can make sure that my dealing with this trauma, I'm not putting it off on my family. I'm not, making their lives difficult. Um, and that's a journey I think everybody in my family has had to make on their own and on their own terms. And I don't know that everybody has done, and some people haven't. Some people have just kind of
Yeah, and maybe
continued.
not everybody's done so successfully in terms of
Yeah.
how they've handled it. Um, how important is it to have a resolution here?
I think for me personally, I finally arrived at a point. I arrived at a point in my life where I needed to move on from my need for resolution. I think I arrived at a point in my life where I needed to let go of the need to have a resolution. Um, my refusing to, I don't want to call it my refusing, um, my reluctance to move on without resolution really was holding up my entire life. It was impacting my ability to, keep romantic partners, to keep close friends even, because there's this huge barrier to you and other people. Like, I had to go through that process of like, how do I tell people that I have a sister that was murdered? Like, it's this major part of my life that's had a huge impact on my life, but it's also not something that really comes up in casual conversation. So I've had to kind of really sort through all of that and figure out how to continue.
How, I mean,
And,
because it
and
is part of your story. It's
yeah,
part of your life. Yeah.
absolutely, it's part of my story and part of my life. But really, I think for me, where it's really important to have resolution is for Skylar and Caden. Truthfully, that is the only thing that matters to me as far as resolution. Um, I've had to accept and I hate to say give up, but I mean you have to let it go. If I continue to hold on to it, I would still be back where I was. But for them, I feel such anger, for them, such um, just unfairness, absolutely just unfair. These are two kids. They were 3. They were 1 years old. We have Ethan, who never got to be alive. Um, I want the resolution for them because they had to go through a life without their loving mother, without a loving parent. Um, all because of I honestly don't know why. I guess that's maybe the other part of the resolution is maybe, and I think I've had to let go of. There's a part of me that always wanted to know why. Ultimately, like why. I truly did not understand it. Maybe there's a part of me that still wants to know why. I've kind of had to again let go of the need for that, but yeah, the importance of resolution is for Skylar and Caden. I want them to know that this terrible thing happened, this incredibly unfair tragedy happened, but somebody was held responsible. That's
Yeah,
what I
and I
want.
mean, as you know, even if the person were to be arrested, tried, and convicted, you still might not know why because they might never
True.
talk and there might not be any
Exactly.
information.
Yeah.
Do you still have some hope? I mean, is there still a part of you that says, let's keep this out there, let's keep it in the public eye, and maybe something will happen?
I think I do have some hope that there will be a resolution. That's why I'm doing this right now, truthfully. Um, there's no part of me that wants to sit down and talk at length about the worst day of my life, but I do it for that hope that if we get this on a podcast, that we have a different audience of people. That the people that listen to podcasts are not usually the type of people that listen to the evening news, that watch the evening news, that read the newspaper, but they are smart, passionate people that like to ask questions. And I'm hoping that if this gets to enough people, that hopefully we get enough people asking questions, we get enough people saying, "Hey, why aren't why aren't the U.S. Marshals treating this as a priority? Um, because we've gotten to this point where we got a call. I'm not even, it's within the last 6 months. We heard that this person in Mexico that is their person of interest has been arrested for murder in Mexico, is in prison in Mexico for murder. Um, Not this murder, but it gives me some hope that somebody will be held accountable at some point. Deal.
What do you, when you think now, today, obviously you were much younger, Jenna was much younger, but what do you miss about her when you think about her?
Um, what I miss the most, I think about her all the time. I think going through my own journey of becoming a parent, I would have loved to have been able to talk to her about what it's like to raise a little toddler boy that's just tearing your house apart. Um, I miss, I mean, truthfully, last summer we all got together on Emerald Isle, me, Skylar, Caden, and my parents and my wife and family, and having us all together, it made me think, gosh, Jenna should be here, to be able to grow old with her, and that's something I think about. We were around the same age when she died, and it's been 17 years, and she stayed the same age. But I've gotten old. Um, and to think just how unfair that is. Um, she didn't deserve that. I don't think anybody deserves what happened to her. Um, and I think more than anything, what I've learned through this entire experience is just how not in control you are of what happens sometimes. And it can be traumatic. It can be the worst thing that happens to you, but you have no control. All you can do is choose how you respond to it.